This is a video on Chapter 5 of Book 1 of Aurobindo's The Life Divine. Good morning, this is a summary and explanation of the 5th chapter of the first book of The Life Divine by Aurobindo. This is Wake Up, Chris speaking. Thank you for liking and subscribing and joining me on Patreon. This series of video is either so that you don't have to read The Life Divine if it's too difficult for you, or that you can read it. That's actually the main purpose, that you can read it with the help of this explanation and summary. Once you heard my summary, then it's easier to understand the chapter while reading it. Very few people have done so of the main gurus and main philosophers who dominate the spiritual marketplace. One of the few was Ken Wilber, for example, and it influenced his work tremendously. Now let's start with the 5th chapter, The Destiny of the Individual. In the last video we have seen that consciousness is the meeting point of the paradoxon of duality, and that we as human beings might not be able to put the infinite into fitting words, but we can experience more and more of it without trying to define it. So language is not the tool to define it, but experience is. Many Indian sages have arrived at the famous neti neti, meaning this is not it. It is much easier to say what the infinite pure being is not than what it is. It is essentially unknowable, but it is experienceable, so to say. Because we ourselves are also it. Thus we can approach the unknowable through our mind and senses, but we can never confine it within them. The ant can never see the whole anthill, but it can crawl around in it and on it and experience aspects of it, one after another, approaching a vision of the whole eventually. So every division is artificial, but that is how our experience works. We gather parts and approach in this way the unknowable and a true unity. The ancient Vedic seers were able to approach it, and later the authors of the Upanishads as well. Same goes for the Buddha and his followers. And Buddhism has been unjustly labeled as an un-Vedic spirituality by non-Indian theologians. But the Upanishads were up to now the only writings that managed to describe it in terms beyond duality, beyond being and non-being, sat and asat, unity and multiplicity, beyond vidya, the knowledge of the absolute oneness, and avidya, of being lost in the relative. We like to see the divine as something purely positive, light without darkness, something that is only good, whatever good is in our mind. Yet this is a division again. Even darkness and what appears to us as ignorance and even evil must be part of the whole, of a true unity. Obscurity and imperfection and blindness must be also part of Satchit Ananda, which is the highest expression of the absolute we as humans can encounter. If we put aside partial logic and wishful thinking, we can find strength in patience. Aurobindo stresses the importance of patience. And we can see that the many might be an illusion, but at the same time, the one is expressing and confirming itself in the many. We have to discard any urge to interpret or project our needs and hopes and fears into this research and assign too much or too little importance to aspects we especially like or dislike. And so we must always look for the most powerful expansion, for the largest and highest viewpoint, and keep working on it, not looking for a specific goal or result, and no matter how long it takes. Thus we have also to discard the plausible perception of the spiritualized mind, to which many on the path arrive, that the universe is an unreal dream, just as we discard the notion that God or the great beyond are illusory ideas. In my previous videos, which were very non-dual, this was one of the main topics actually, this illusion of the universe, of Maya. But Aurobindo sees this completely differently. This cannot be an illusion. All these ideas come from being unaccustomed to other means of gathering knowledge, he says. That's why you arrive at either that matter is matter or that there is no matter. Be it the body with his mind. Usually what we use is the body with the senses or the mind. But only because we cannot see or comprehend something easily doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We cannot see air, yet no one would dispute that we all breathe it all the time. There's something untrue about matter and form. They have something of an illusion of ignorance because they are representations. They're representations of what really is, which is indescribable. Meaning they are not the truest form of manifestation. They're like a reflection of the moon at night on a lake. The moon seems to be in the lake, and only because we cannot find it there doesn't mean that the moon does not exist. It just is not what and where we assumed it is, because we trusted our senses. So we have to find new ways to experience and to look at the universe. The divine has chosen to manifest itself in matter and form and mind for a reason. And our role in this game, in this huge experiment and experience, is self-discovery. This self-discovery is not instantaneous, unfortunately. Would be nice if it was. But it is progressive, it unfolds. So we need patience for it to unfold. And if we really want to arrive at a whole, we have to stop discarding parts. Once we have discovered a more beautiful aspect than the previous one, we should not throw away the old one. To understand everything, we cannot afford to be exclusive. Just as the universe does not exclude the individual. We as humans gather and observe, and we should do so without judging. Actually, it is also true that our progression of consciousness does not change the eternal essentially. Yet the human progress is transcending something, and we are part of this transcendent and even need it. Every human individual who becomes enlightened supports the collective and even the whole world game. And if enlightened humans would all prefer to disappear and not be active in the world anymore after their enlightenment, there would be no collective progress. Thus, the ascetic path is also not a valid path because it is not inclusive enough. Moreover, if the universe were an illusion, enlightenment would be too. Many tried to escape from Maya by declaring everything an illusion. But then the bondage to Maya is also an illusion, and the soul is also an illusion. You don't need to seek freedom if everything is an illusion. If nothing exists, where's the issue? What are you talking about? So, what is left as a fact? The fact is that we experience something. The old cogito ergo sum of Descartes. Something is happening and we feel that it is happening to a me. No matter if we declare it an illusion or not, there is experience happening and there seems to be an experiencer, albeit in confusion. And the way out is also by confusion, by a paradox. The way to cut the Gordic knot of the ego is by a supreme act of egoism, he says. We focus on our individual salvation first. We focus on our own salvation first. And after this salvation, we look at the rest of the world in bondage and realize that this is not all. This is still not the end of the journey after all. My own freedom is not enough. That is why spiritual teachers teach. They have to. I've often asked myself the question, why do people like Eckhart Tolle and so teach? Why do Advaita and Buddhist teachers teach? Yeah? Because of this. Even if they assume that everything is illusion, they have to teach because an individual freedom is not enough. We're all sitting in the same boat. With enlightenment comes the realization that there is no difference and no separation between the one and the many, and no separation between the self and the world. Aurobindo writes, we must accept the many-sidedness of the manifestation, even while we assert the unity of the manifested. Meaning the absolute is absolute and includes unity as well as multiplicity. There's an infinite number of ways to look at it and to experience it. And the ego is a device, a limiting transitional device, as Aurobindo calls it, used by the divine in order to repeat its transcendence and universality, a self-imposed convention. So there is also a purpose to the ego, as we will see in the chapter about the ego a little bit later. The infinite is completely free. The ego is not, of course. But it is not its job to be free or feel free. Not feeling free leads the ego onto the journey of self-perfection. And then the conscient ego becomes the superficial point at which the awareness of unity can emerge, as he writes. So the ego is not all bad. It is limited and limiting, but it is also part of the whole. Actually, the ego is nothing else but limitation and concentration. It is feeling divided and imperfect, and thus creates the illusion of being an individual. But when the ego transcends this personal consciousness, it begins to include and be overpowered by that which is to us superconscious, by something higher. It becomes aware of the cosmic unity and enters into the transcendent self, which here Cosmos expresses by a multiple oneness, as he writes. What does it mean? It means the ego is like the crest of a wave or even spindrift spray, very specialized. Yeah? On the top of the wave, the white stuff, almost separated from the rest of the ocean. As separated from the rest of the ocean as possible, flying on top. But in its high point, it can see that it is indeed part of the ocean, not separated, not alone. And thus, it is like the ocean's way to look upon itself from above. Same with the ego in the universe. The liberation of the ego of the individual is thus not only wanted by the unity, but is the keynote of the whole orchestra. As he writes, the pivot on which all else turns. So this is a necessary process this ego and awakening and enlightening progress and process. First, this union happens vertically between the one, the individual, and the oneness, the absolute. And then horizontally between the reunited one, the individual who knows that he's part with everything, a part of everything, between the reunited one and the many of all the other things and beings. That means the concentration of the ego on itself as a separate tiny individual can be switched off or at least expanded. He writes that whenever even a single soul is liberated, there is the tendency to an extension and even an outburst of the same divine self-consciousness in other souls. Where shall we fix the limit of this extension? We don't know. It's not our job, but there is a huge extension possible. Meaning the universe wants us to wake up and reunite with it. Because our separation is indeed an illusion, but a necessary one. But reunite with a new look. For every journey to enlightenment is different and presents the universe with a totally different new outlook on itself. We don't have to blot ourselves out when this happens. It's not that, bam, we're gone. Like this old simile with a drop dissolving back into the ocean. It might feel like that, but it doesn't mean that you're gone then. We can stay and help others, like the bodhisattvas of the Buddhism, who vow to stay here until everyone is liberated. And then we can also let the others feel the joy of creation, rather than the ruthless ordeal of suffering. I like this wording, ruthless ordeal of suffering. Yeah, that's how it feels to most people. But it's also possible to feel freedom and joy. But not our freedom and joy, it's the freedom and joy of the universe that we can plug into. Our paths lead through avidya, through multiplicity and ignorance, in which death and suffering and fear predominate. And through consenting with this avidya aspect of the infinite unity, we can progress. He writes, by attaining to the unborn beyond all becoming, we are liberated from this lower birth and death. By accepting the becoming freely as the divine, we invade mortality with the immortal beatitude and become luminous centers of its conscious self-expression in humanity. Meaning, the main and common mechanism of the path to freedom is to accept the bondage first, and the seemingly ugly parts of creation and existence. Surrender. So many teachers have been talking about surrender. And this is it. We have to surrender that the path is like this. It is uncomfortable. And to submit to the ultimate wisdom of the Absolute. It knows better than us. It is not about escaping, nor of giving up or turning a blind eye or having to accept misery. No. It is about accepting that we can ascend and transcend, and that this transformation leads through all kinds of uncomfortable aspects of the whole, just as it leads through comfortable ones as well. The cosmic play is neither a purposeless illusion, nor is it a dumb accident. There's a plan. The ascent to the divine life is the human journey and raison d'être. And for some reason unknown to us, it is like a cross-country hike, like a survival workshop. Later in the book, Aurobindo will explain why it is like that. But this will also only be a partial explanation, because we cannot know everything that the Absolute knows. But for now we have to assume that there is a purpose to it, because there is a plan. It's not up to us. We have always this megalomania that we should be masters of the world and decide what is right and wrong. It's not about right and wrong, and it's not up to us. And there's no point in complaining about it. It is difficult, okay, but at the finish line awaits cosmic joy that you made it. So to summarize, it is the fate and destiny of the individual human being to make this journey, like a pioneer, and thus make it ever more possible for the whole of humanity to follow. So it's the destiny of the whole of humanity to make this journey, and it is the destiny of the individual to find his own way on this journey. And the first ones will be pioneers, and the more who manage to make it, the more will be able to follow. It will get easier and easier, as we will see in the next two chapters: man in the universe and the ego and its dualities. Okay, this is it for today. Thank you very much to all my patrons. Thank you for liking and subscribing and sharing the videos with your friends, and staying with this series of the whole life divine, summarized and explained chapter by chapter. Thank you, and see you soon.